Welcome to the RAS Project, a conversation about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family, tech, and marketing. My name is Ivan Tamokov, and I'm your host. On this podcast, you will gather 100% real, raw, and unfiltered life changing advice to help you level up in every aspect of your life and business and help you reach your goals and dreams. And you might be wondering who it is that I have with me today, and it is the beautiful Courtney Turner. Good morning, Courtney.
Good morning.
So there's a reason Courtney's here this morning with me, and that is because that is the big special announcement that I wanted to share before we kick things off. And that is the fact that Courtney, who we actually met on a prior episode of the RAS Project, where she was a guest, and she took the time to share her amazing story, which I'm going to have her actually talk about in a few minutes here. But Courtney is actually going to be joining me as a co-host of the show moving forward. So ecstatic about this. We talked about this over the weekend, right? Just kind of like Friday, Saturday, it was just like kind of coming together and like so fast paced. And so I'm pretty excited about this because, you know, I think when you were a guest on the show, even I mentioned this several times that, oh my God, fascinating story, you know, and totally blessed, you know, to have you on the show. So before we have you kind of share a little bit about your story, you know, I wanted to mention that Courtney actually has a new podcast that's going to be kicking off, the Courtney Turner podcast. And let's just say that this is going to rattle the cages. And if you're looking for the type of podcast that's not boring and keeps you on your toes, go and subscribe. It's getting ready to launch, and go and subscribe because this is definitely the podcast that you want to have in your arsenal. So, Courtney, let's with the viewer share, you know, in a few minutes, let's talk about your story a little bit because you have a fascinating story.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So the Cliff Notes version essentially is that my mother had germ measles during the first trimester of pregnancy. And so I was born with what's called congenital rubella. You may be familiar with the term rubella. It's in the MMR vaccine. R stands for rubella. My parents, unfortunately, neither of them were vaccinated, and so therefore I was born with congenital rubella, which left me with several medical complications, not limited to, but including I was born with a cataract in my left eye, which I'm now blind in one eye because I developed glaucoma. It's not a normal eye, so there's lots of complications with that. I was also born with a bilateral hearing impairment. I did not receive hearing aids till I was almost 6 years old, however, because I learned how to speak by reading lips. And there's a really great story I love to tell about the first time I got hearing aids and I stepped outside and I kept asking my mom, "What's that sound? What's that sound?" And it was birds chirping. I had never in my life heard birds chirping before. And to this day, I get teary-eyed thinking about that. But my mom did cry at the time. I had heart surgery when I was about a year old. There was my heart that was opened and did not close, needed to be surgically closed. I had asymmetrical bone development, hypotonic limbs, which means the muscles in my limbs didn't develop, fine and graphic motor impairment. I think my growth was stunted. I was missing 10 teeth. So as you can see, there were lots and lots of challenges. So it's been quite the road, but I'm, you know, as you can see, I'm here. So all things considered, I was really, really fortunate.
Yeah. You know, it's as you were, and I've heard the story multiple times, but I wanted you to share it again because it's just, I feel like every time, you know, hearing about that, I think it's, you sort of, I mean, if you don't, you're inhuman. But to me, I was just like listening, I'm like, you know, there's less fortunate people out there in the world. You know, and the fact that, I mean, you are a miracle. And I think people just don't realize, which this kind of leads into our topic of discussion here in a little bit, is the fact that I don't think, I mean, today's Monday and a lot of people are like, oh, it's Monday, you know, I got to get going. Oh my God, I'm tired from the weekend. But you know, there's a lot of people that probably didn't wake up this morning to begin with. And I think it's, you know, the gratitude mindset, which I think you've embraced that through the course of your life, because and this might be for a separate episode, but you're extremely, extremely active in fitness.
Yep.
In fact, just fascinated with some of the things that you've been able to do because, like you said yourself, I mean, all odds were against you, right?
Yep.
When you were little, all odds were against you, and you beat all those odds.
They told my mom the best she could hope was to find a nice institution for me to spend my life.
Wow.
Fortunately, she didn't take that advice, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is crazy. That is crazy. Like, I feel like, and this is something that, I want to talk about. But first, before we jump into the topic of discussion, just want to mention we're live everywhere: Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Periscope, LinkedIn Live right now. And we're streaming everywhere. In fact, I'm pretty excited about this because we're going to be doing this twice a week on Mondays and Fridays at this point. And so that kind of leads me to the topic of discussion, something I really, really, and I'm excited on this first episode to talk to you about it. And that is difference of opinion. Difference of opinion. I know that you like this is something for your podcast. And by the way, for those of you listening, make sure you can go and subscribe to the Courtney Turner podcast. Okay, it's gonna be a new episode are gonna coming out in the month of November, and I'm telling you guys, like this is the podcast that you want to listen to. It's very heavy on the political side, which I absolutely admire about Courtney. She has a very, very and what is that term, Courtney, that you mentioned? What is the term that they use for someone who critiques or provides feedback? I'm trying to remember.
Pundit?
Pundit. That's it.
Pundit. Yeah.
That was the term that I was looking for. And so definitely go and subscribe to the podcast. But let's talk about difference of opinion. We are, a couple of weeks away from election, and like it seems
8 days.
8 days. Oh my God. So I've heard people saying on social media that they're about to relocate to another country. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that it really depends on what they're looking for. And I think that is part of what is so fascinating about this current election. I would argue this is probably one of the most important sequential elections, certainly of my lifetime, but possibly in history. And I think when people say that it's possible. You there? Did I lose you? There you are. Okay.
There I am.
It is technical glitches. So it's possible that that really is what they want. That they want a different form of government. They want a different, societal structure, and that's certainly within their purview. However, I think a lot of people who are making these claims don't necessarily the extent and the ramifications of what it is they think they want.
Right.
We have a very unique government structure. A lot of people say we're a democracy, but we're not. We're a constitutional republic, and that is incredibly unique, incredibly rare, and we are the first to institute anything of that kind of structure like it. The Constitution of the United States of America is the first of its kind. And I think when people say they're going to relocate, they don't really realize what it is. Saying like, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it,
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
think that's where a lot of it comes from. They're not, a lot of people really aren't as informed as they like to think they are. And, there's that saying that opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, right? And everybody's entitled to their opinion. But that doesn't mean that everybody's opinion is as well informed or educated as it could be. So,
absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. But there's a couple of things that you mentioned that I wanted to allude to, and that is, let's just face it, greatest country in the world. I mean, it doesn't matter who gets elected president, which I think so many people literally got their heads so bent over forward that they think that a new president is going to solve their problems. They think a new president is going to make them happier. A new president is going to make their business grow. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, sure, every country needs a leader. Don't get me wrong. Every country does need a good leader. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the leader is not going to change your life for you.
Probably not. And that's actually a really interesting point
Hmm.
because it goes back to my point of people not really understanding the ramifications of what they're asking for. Our government structure is very unique in that we have three branches of government.
Hmm.
The president is not a dictator.
Right.
And I think that, that's part of what is on some people's minds is very scary about the direction that we are, that we could possibly move into,
Hmm.
is to give more power to that branch of government. And that's not what we want. We really want to keep the checks and balances that our founding fathers had implemented because that's what makes us so
Right.
unique. And that's what enables the people, the citizens of this country, to have the power that they do have. You brought up the point about people being happier and having their
Hmm.
businesses grow. Part of what people move to this country for is to have the freedoms and the entrepreneurial latitude
Right.
to take their own initiative and to reap the fruits of their labor, and also the pursuit of happiness. That's really embedded in our founding documents, and it's something that makes us really unique.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was a really good point. And you're absolutely right. Is this that, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things right now is because, there's so much division in the country, I feel like. And a lot of the division comes from difference of opinion.
Mm.
And when I look at that, I wonder to myself, I'm like, can we just not, agree to disagree as human beings? Like, can we not, just look at, politics or life or, the world of chaos or mediocrity or whatever else, that think that might be negative in the world and allow that to influence us? Because I see all these stats that like, stress and depression attributes to this, this, and this. And I'm like, really? Does it? Or is it the fact that people allow it? Is it the fact that people
Yeah.
allow that negative consumption?
Absolutely, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, two people can experience the exact same
Hmm.
circumstance and have a completely different response to it, and different perception of it.
Right.
So, that's what makes human beings so incredibly fascinating, and I personally think incredible. Is that we are all so unique, and we can literally have the exact same experience, and two people can respond to it totally differently. And for one person, it could be the catalyst that moves their life forward. And for another person, it could be the thing that destroys them. And so when you talk about the difference of opinion, I think that right now we are seeing a lot of division, and I've wrestled with this a lot, really trying to understand if we are more divided than we've been in previous times, or if it just appears that way, because it's hard when you're in it, right? When
Yeah.
you're currently in something, it's really hard to have kind of that bird's eye view. It's really easy to look back and hindsight is 2020. Yeah, hindsight's twenty
Right.
twenty, right?
Right.
So it's really easy to look back and have such clarity on something, but when you're in it, it's not so clear. And I don't know if we are more divided. I don't really have that answer, but it certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
And I can certainly say that, I don't think I'm alone in that perspective. But when people have difference of opinion, I think a lot of it comes from people have different worldviews. We're only
Right.
capable of looking through our own eyes. We can't step outside of ourselves. And this is something I think really important for people to understand. There are a lot of people who want to take this, what I call moral high ground, because
Right.
they say, oh, I'm not on that side or that side, I pick and choose. And they're alluding to this notion that they're kind of morally superior, and they don't pick teams, or they don't pick, Republican, Democrat. And the reality is that I think that that's a little bit dishonest, because
Yeah.
while you may not favor one side or the other, you may truly be kind of in the middle and figuring it out, and that's totally valid and that's fair, and everybody's entitled to, and you can change your mind as well. However, I don't think it's fair for anybody to say they don't have a bias.
Right.
Nor do I think that that's the goal as human beings. I think as human beings, we are only capable of having bias because we're only capable of seeing things through our own perspective and worldviews. However, I think that it actually helps us when we're having conversations with people who may not agree, for that other person to know where our bias lies, for them to know where we stand. So I always say I think the goal is not to eradicate the bias. The goal is to be consciously choose your bias, to become aware of it first, and
Right.
then to say, okay, this is where I sit, and I want to be here. This seems right to me. That doesn't mean we are right. We don't know. We don't have the crystal ball. We're not able to take that, bird's eye view. However, we know what we think is right. And I think that's integrity, is choosing that bias, actively standing behind your conviction. And I actually think that makes for more fruitful conversations with people who may disagree, because then they know where you're coming from and they can, choose their stance. And possibly you can find where there's areas that you do agree, you disagree, and you can navigate the conversation much more productively, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was a jam-packed segment right there. And I want to allude to that because you mentioned a few important things that we're talking about perception, also in perspective. But first, just wanted to mention that if you're just joining us on the show, we've got the lovely Courtney, who is the new co-host of the RAS Project, and we are talking about difference of opinion. We're live all over the web: Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn Live, Periscope, Facebook. And so you said something really interesting, Courtney. You said perception. And my take on that is perception is reality, right? Because we all have our individual perspective on things, right? And here's something very interesting, actually, that I got to thinking about when you were talking about perspective. And that is we draw our own conclusion on things, which is perspective, right? Based on how it applies to our own lives, our own interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, as they say, perception is reality, but perception varies based on your consumption of information. So the way I perceive things are different than the way you perceive things. That's the beauty about it, is this, that, let's face it, if there were identical perceptions, the world would be extremely dull.
I concur. I wholeheartedly.
The world will be extremely dull, and that's why we have this diversification right now with the elections and everything
It's why we
going on.
have freedom of speech. That's why we have the First Amendment, is because
Exactly.
people have different opinions. Yeah, and that's
Exactly.
how we learn and grow. That's where real progress is derived.
Yep. Absolutely. That's a great point. Is this that, I think people get so adamant about being so self-righteous that they forget about that First Amendment. Yep. It's like, just because you have a perception of things in a certain way and you think that is the way that things should be, does not necessarily mean that how things are.
Right.
So I think we talked about this actually on your podcast episode, is the 3 different realities. There's my reality, your reality, and the reality of the world. Absolutely. And people just can't quite fathom that, because I think that a lot of people want to be self-righteous, right? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people do want to be self-righteous. And I think, there's a quote by Nietzsche that I love, and I use this a lot. People don't want to know the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a lot of truth in that. People get very attached to their perspective and their perceptions. And that creates a sense of clarity for them. They're inside their own little bubble. Right. And I think that this awareness or a realization that maybe things are different from what they thought is actually very disconcerting for them. It's hard for them to reconcile. And so instead of opening up their mind to the possibility that they, what they thought is actually not real, or not 100% accurate, they dig their heels and they have to prove that they're right. And
that is, I mean, and I feel like that's a lot of what's happening right now. Honestly, I feel like it's the difference of opinion. I feel like, and we see this all over social media, right? Like, I actually laugh every morning. Like, I think I saw something in my feed this morning that, like, someone posted a very controversial post, and they were like, okay, so I'm going to watch my friends get smaller and smaller, or the haters build up. And I'm like, really? You're like wasting your time and energy on shit like that? Like, why don't you use your time and energy on something more productive? And the fact that, there's people that disagree with you out there. And that's one thing that I think I struggled, when I was younger as an Eastern European, is the fact that I just couldn't fathom and accept the fact that others would disagree with me. And when they did, I saw that as a derogatory thing. I saw it as if, like, okay, well, they disagree with me, so I must be wrong and they must be right. It's almost like an insult on intelligence, on your own intelligence. It's an insult on your self-confidence. I mean, that
Absolutely.
probably explains the fact in part why I had zero self confidence is because I thought that everybody else was right and I was wrong. And it's like,
Right.
I'm just this Eastern European that doesn't have a freaking clue about anything about, the Western world or how things works. Maybe that's why I never really got heavy into politics. I feel like now, I mean, other than I guess it was 8 years ago when Obama got, elected, everybody was like all jazzed up about it. That
Mhm.
passed. And now, we've got Trump and we've got Biden also. Everybody's like all jazzed up. And it's like, okay, well, once, a president gets elected, all right,
Mhm.
what are we going to do then? Like, what are we going to bicker about? What are we going to fight about in social media? Because I feel like my social stream is flooded with, political memes,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, it is. It's a very heightened time right now. I this we can kind of circle back to what you were bringing up earlier when you said that
Mm-hmm.
the president doesn't determine your happiness. It's not going to make your business grow. There is an element of truth in that. However, the direction of the government does give you certain freedoms,
Sure.
or take them away. And I think that because there's such a diametrically opposed ideologies presented for us right now,
Mm-hmm.
that's why people are so heated, and they do feel that it is very personally going to affect them. I wish people took this kind of initiative, interest, and passion at the local level, because I think our government would look very different if people got much more involved as
Sure.
citizens locally, municipally, and that is really where the citizens have the power to effectuate the most change, and that trickles up as opposed to trickling down. It starts with the local cities. You see a lot of
Right.
times what happens here, especially in California. A lot of the laws that get implemented they carry out, and so I wish people took that kind of action more
Right.
regularly locally.
Right. No, that's a really good point that you mentioned because, you were talking about how government, affects direction. And sure, it does, obviously, of an entire country because it affects the way a government operates, the way a country operates,
Mhm.
obviously. But, looking at it, the last 100 years, right? I mean, we've had multiple presidents come and go,
Yeah.
some have been very favored and others haven't, they've been very opposed. In the grand scheme of things, I mean, we've done okay. We've done
Mhm.
okay. It's like I feel
Sure.
like people try to be too patriotic, maybe, but then they forget about what patriotic really is
Right,
in a way
right.
that they get so hyper focused in the political aspect, of things. So, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, patriotism and like, because I know a lot of people are talking about right now, like, oh, I'm patriotic and I'm going to vote and blah, 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 and all this stuff. What's your thoughts on that?
Um, so it's a really interesting point. I think patriotism is actually very important. If you don't have a pride in your country, then what is going to give you any impetus to defend it? And
Right.
I mean that on every level. In terms of getting out there and voting, in terms of messaging, in terms of uh, at the extreme level, going to fight for your country. So I think patriotism is very important. I think we've seen an increase in shaming people for being patriotic, uh, which I've honestly never understood. I don't. That makes no sense to me at all. The only thing that I can think of is that I think some people may be conflating nationalism with
Right.
patriotism, and there is a difference. I would say it's a difference of degree. Uh, as Americans who are patriotic, we have pride in the history of our nation, the development of our nation, hopefully in the future of our nation. That doesn't
Right.
mean that we want our nation to take over the world. That's not what we're looking for. And that's really more speaking to nationalistic interests. So I
Sure.
think that may be where some people are conflating the two, and they think of being patriotic as being nationalists who we want to colonize the world, and that's just not accurate. But otherwise, I don't know why anybody would have an argument against being patriotic. And then there's the other argument that I hear from a lot of people that America is just not special. We're just like everyone else. And This is not an egotistical, egocentric concept. We have lots of
Right.
tangible evidence to prove such. This is based on fact. America is exceptional. There is no other country like it. And I think what really proves this point, one of the things that really proves this point so
Right.
well, is I've had people from around the world reach out to me to tell me how invested they are in this current election. And if we, I have to say, quite honestly, I don't, I try to follow what's happening in the world, but I'm not, like so entrenched and invested in every election in other countries.
Right.
So why are they? And that is a really interesting question, right? And I always ask them because I'm so fascinated by it. And usually the response is because what happens with you guys affects us. And, it has a profound impact on us. And so really waiting with bated breath
Right.
to see what's going to happen. And, if we were not that special, why would they care?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point. And you said something that I want to touch upon actually, and that you said exceptional, America being exceptional. So
Yeah.
as an Eastern European, as a naturalized citizen,
Mm-hmm.
who was, I was fortunate enough to take the U.S. naturalization test, and that was
Amazing.
an amazing experience. And I'll tell you
You
this.
probably know way more about our history than most American citizens do, unfortunately.
Well, you
But
said it. You said
yeah,
it, and but it's true. It is true. It is true. Most
yeah,
most Americans don't know their own history, believe it or not.
no.
And like, well, one side of that is this: when you tell most Americans that, do you know your history? You're trying to be
Right.
patriotic and all, but do you know your history?
And a lot of
Because
people
most
really
don't.
don't.
I think they developed their own version of history that they like to believe in.
We have a lot of that, actually. And that bothers me so much, this
Hmm.
revisionist history. And, the argument that I make a lot of the times is people will tell me that they want to eradicate the negative aspects of our history.
Right.
And, you I take such a strong stance against that because are we perfect? No. No human being is, no society is. However, if we erase all the things that we've done wrong, we can't see where we've grown. I talk about this a lot in fitness. Like, I think it's really important to have goals, but it's also really important to acknowledge where you've come from, where you've started.
Right.
So I like people to track their experience and their progress. And it's the same thing for our country. And, arguably in some ways, it has a larger ripple effect when you're talking about a country because the mistakes that we've made and that we've learned from and that we've corrected, those set the precedents moving forward. We don't want to erase that. We want to acknowledge that we've made these mistakes and look how much growth there's been,
Right.
and look at where we're going now. So a lot of people don't know our real history. A lot of people are, perpetuating this shame in our history.
Yeah.
And I think that is another thing that I'm really opposed to. I think it is quite devastating. And I don't just think it's devastating in terms of the potential ramifications and consequences that it can incur, but I think it's damaging to the psyche,
Absolutely.
to especially children to be ashamed of your history. You have no control over what your ancestors have done. And moreover, you should learn from it and not be ashamed of it because we've done a lot right. So there's a lot to be proud
Yeah.
of as well.
Absolutely.
And the other one other
Absolutely.
point that I want to make is that, if you don't have redemption as a nation, how do you have redemption personally and individually? And redemption is essential to moving forward and to progress. So,
Right. Absolutely. I wanted to go back to allude to the exceptional comment you made because where I was going with that is, as an Eastern European, I 100% concur with the fact that the United States of America is 100% exceptional. Exceptional in many ways, exceptional in good ways, exceptional in bad ways, like any country. Let's just say that if you think that a country is perfect, then you should probably move to a different country because it's not. I don't think there's any country out there in the world that's perfect because every country goes through its own set of issues and challenges, and that's part of growth. That's part of evolution. And
yeah.
so I concur on the fact that, the United States of America is 100% exceptional, because I think back to, that 14-year-old kid, that being me, when we first immigrated to the United States of America. And actually, my father has been here since, the late 90s. It was actually
Wow.
October 1990. So he's been here for a long time,
Okay.
So, and the United States of America is my home. This is where my family is. This is where I'm raising my kids. And so, but where I'm going with all of this is that the reason why we ended up here is
Yeah.
because of exception, because of opportunity, because of growth, because of change. And people don't understand, because, let's face it, like, I think it was maybe 20 years ago, is that the United States of America was number one in the world in terms of infrastructure, like technical infrastructure, internet, the web, all that. Now it's like, I don't know, ranks
Yeah.
number 20 or 30 or something. Like, the rest of the world is ahead of it. But here's the thing, the land of the free, there's a reason they call it the land of the free, is because in the United States of America, you can literally be anything you want to, anything you set your mind to. And you've got access to all the things that you need. And so,
Absolutely.
when people say that, like, when talking about here, difference of opinions, like, that's not true. You are manipulating, the status quo, meaning that, you're saying, well, the United States of America, is becoming a bad country and we're going downhill and all this. And it's like, well, if that's what you think, first of all, move to another country.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. If you
Because
don't like it, leave.
Exactly. Because the way I see it is like, been here 26 years, seen a few presidents come and go, and guess what? I'm still alive.
Yeah, you survived. Yeah.
It still survived. And like, people just don't, I feel like too many Americans just get immersed into the election and politics and stupid crap that they just forget like what truly matters.
Well, I agree with some of that to some extent, but I think it's important for people to be involved and to educate themselves. Sure. What I take issue with is people who have such strong opinions but don't know what they're talking about. You know, to me, that's really a bigger problem. So many people want to say that they have a strong opinion and that they know what's best for the future, but they haven't done the education. They haven't done the research. They haven't educated themselves.
Sure.
And so, if you don't know, that's fine. And if that's not your priority, that's totally fine. But then you shouldn't, don't claim to be an authority, And sure. I think that's true in any area of expertise, any field. But if you are going to be an active participant, if you are going to be, having the discourse, the dialogue with people, and you have a platform, if you are going to be just voting, you should be educating yourself. So I do think people should be involved, because if they're taking action, they should be involved, but be involved from a place of, integrity and information. Don't be involved just because you're hysterical. That's
well, you said it. You said it. Just to interject this, you said integrity. And I wanted to interject on that, because I think that is the word that most people don't keep top of mind right now, is this: can you be integral? Right now, can we agree to disagree? And like you said, educate yourself. Right. Don't develop your, own version of, the truth. Educate yourself before you actually, decide to say something that, you don't mean or is not true. And I think that's probably the difference here, is that people don't understand, is just that there's a cordial difference between stating an opinion about something and stating a fact. They're not one and the same. And most people,
they're not.
Exactly. And most people would like to think that, well, my opinion on the country and my state of happiness or unhappiness or my life or business is the way that things are. It's a fact. No, your opinion is your opinion based on probably your perspective on things, most likely, right? It does not make it true.
I loved it. That was a quote that Pence said in the debate with Kamala Harris, and it's not his. He took the quote, but it was that you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts, and
Right.
that goes for all people. Absolutely. I think where a lot of the confusion is that one, it's the media, but that's a whole separate conversation. But the other is that there are facts. There are absolutely absolute facts. And some of them we are privy to and we have access to
Hmm.
knowing exactly what happened, what these facts are. Then you can have an opinion and an interpretation of those facts. But you don't get to make up your own facts, nor do you get to say that your opinion is fact.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's a really good point, and that's where I think a lot of people get it wrong. Is just that your opinion is your opinion, and let's face it, social media is probably the most notorious about this. I mean, I see this on Facebook, I see this on LinkedIn now, I see this on Twitter is like seriously just
Twitter, yeah.
rat race of people just like bashing each other, and then there's of course Instagram also, which really has
Instagram.
become a victim of that, where too many people are great, you express your own opinion, but please realize that it's your own opinion, right? It's not a fact. If you've got fact that is fact checked from a credible source, then that makes it true.
Right.
But it's just amazing. And why is it that when it comes to election time that this happens? I feel like most people bend over backwards or literally get their panties in a wad, excuse my French, for the fact that it's election time and they start thinking like, well, my opinion is a fact. No,
Oh,
dude,
yeah.
it's an opinion.
Exactly. And I do think social media is notorious. And part of it is just the platform because you aren't, you're not in front of the person. So you don't have to face them. You don't have to look them in the eye. You don't have to humanize them. You can throw yourself out there. People are way more brazen than they would ever be in person. I have
Right,
experienced this where people will get into battle with me online and see things that are horrendous. I mean, really
right.
just cruel that they would never have the guts and the courage to say to my face.
In
But
real
they
life,
can because
right?
they're behind a keyboard and, they don't have to deal with looking me in the eye and seeing another human being and
Sure.
realize how cruel they're being. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and I want to touch upon that because you said keyboard, and the keyboard warriors are at large all over social media right now. Let's just
Yeah.
face it. So, how do you handle that? How do you approach it when, like you said, you get into these, I feel like, senseless debacles with people who feel like they're so self righteous? Like, what's your take on that? Like, how should you handle, someone who they feel so strong felt on a topic and then just can't let go?
One of the things that I have really started to do is to put the onus on them. I start asking questions because I think
Hmm.
people get into attack mode.
Right.
And you're talking about facts versus opinions, and people go into ad hominems. They're just attacking your character. And so when people do that, it's very easy to retreat and feel offended, insulted, and to retaliate from that place.
Right.
So I try to step back and instead ask them, why do you think that? What
Right.
makes you what facts do you have to back that up? Or where is this coming from? Or it varies depending on what
Right.
the accusation has
Right.
been. But to really put it back on them instead of getting into a name calling fight. That's just not productive, and both people walk away feeling hurt and angry. And I think a lot of relationships can be destroyed that way. And I just don't see the purpose of that. So I would rather, if you are going to have an intellectual discussion online, then it should really be a discourse. So I really tried to ask them, what is it that makes you think this way? Or can you give me some examples? And, really put it back on them. And then hopefully you can have more of an intellectual discourse as opposed to just, name calling back and forth.
What's really fascinating about the flip side of that too, actually, that I want to get your take on is the fact that, let's just face it, people don't like being proved wrong.
Sure.
When you fact check someone and
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, why do you feel this way,
Yeah.
right? And if you have a valid reason to believe that obviously their opinion is wrong, whatever it might be, life, world, business, politics,
Right.
social media, whatever,
Yeah.
and you fact check them and you put them on the spot. What's fascinating about that is like most people are like, well, screw you, man. Like immediately the block button comes like block.
Right.
Why? Because you disagree with me. Because I proved you wrong. Because I made you realize that you're stating an opinion and not a fact. And
Right.
let's just face it, honestly, majority of social media is nothing more than opinions. A vast
Yeah.
majority of social media is. I know Facebook. I mean, look through my streams and I follow a lot of people who are very heavy, on the political side of things. A lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats also,
Mhm.
and you see different posts, right? Like different messaging, and I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, has social media really become a place to cultivate people based on opinions and create chaos and controversy? And maybe this is coming from a place where I happened to watch The Social Dilemma
Sure.
this past week, and like it just really got me thinking. Which, by the way, that movie, I felt like the first half of the movie was like bashing social media. I'm like, okay, I must be doing all this wrong then. If I'm on social media and like it's stressful, it's depressing, it can attribute to ending my marriage. And it's like, uh, says who? And so I want to get your take. I mean, like the controversial, the keyboard warriors.
Hmm.
How do you approach that? And what's some insight that you can share to other folks that, okay, well, if you can't agree to disagree with someone, how do you go about, do you block them?
It really depends.
Hmm.
So I personally like hearing people who are on the other side of an argument from my own.
Sure.
I like hearing other perspectives. I feel like either one, I will learn something I didn't know, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, and it will change my perspective. And I think that's really beneficial. That's how I grow. That's how I, you know, correct where I want my bias to sit. So I think that that helps me evolve as a person, and you know, I also think it's just really interesting as a part of an intellectual journey. So I personally enjoy hearing other people's opinions, even when they don't agree with me. Um,
Yeah.
However, the second thing about that is also if I'm really convinced that the other person is wrong, and I
Sure.
become more strongly entrenched in my own view, it behooves me to hear another side of the argument and to have that discussion, because then I learn how to be better at presenting my argument. Because if you're preaching to the choir, you don't really have to be all that cogent in your arguments, right? They already agree with you. They're going to be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But if you're talking to somebody who doesn't agree with you, it makes you a better communicator to be able
Right.
to explain why you think the way that you do. So that's my personal perspective. I really enjoy having that discourse, but I also think that that's where progress arises. So when I approach, talking to somebody who is, very clearly, and they're honest and transparent about the fact that we are on different sides of, a particular issue, what I like to do is find the common ground first. I
Okay.
start from, and that's what I realize. A lot of people, you end up agreeing on a lot more than you disagree. The disagreements are just louder. There's lots of noise around what you don't agree on. But there's also a lot of things we do agree on. We might just not agree on how to get there. And so
Right.
I like to try and start from finding what are the things we do agree on. Let's start there. And then you build some sort of rapport, you build some trust, you humanize the other person, and you have more of a uh, an I intimate kind of a conversation, because now it's two people talking as opposed to just two bobbleheads who are disputing something.
Sure.
Let's start from there,
Yeah.
and then as you keep moving, you find a place where you don't agree, and then I try to have an honest conversation about why we disagree. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to touch upon that for a second. And first of all, just to mention to listeners that that is perhaps one of the top reasons why I wanted you to be a co-host, is because the level of optimism and positivity is hard to come about. And I think that that is probably a derivative of probably your story and your background, because I think that has a huge correlation to life experiences. And so, when it comes to difference of opinion and agreeing to disagree and having an optimistic outlook, which a lot of people kind of have a pessimistic outlook when you agree, when you get into a difference of opinion, debacle. And that's very hard to come about because, and the flip side of that is just that, you never know what you might learn. Sometimes you might be wrong,
Yeah.
especially if you are so in tuned and immersed into your own opinion, which a lot of people are. A lot of people are immersed into their own opinions, and they misconstrue it with facts
Yeah.
about life, business, politics, news, everything, right? And I think that's in part why a lot of people kind of refrain, from watching the news and politics and all that, because they think that that's a solution to avoiding the problem when you know that the problem exists. And so having that optimistic outlook, and being positive and saying, okay, we might not see eye to eye, but you know what? That's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably, because if we see eye to eye, right, yes, it's important to resonate, but
Yeah.
also it's important to have difference of opinion because
Absolutely.
that's what helps grow and thrive things in life and in business and in politics. That's what keeps the United States of America, I think, so flexible, so diverse, so
Yeah.
opportunistic,
Yeah. Without a doubt. And you said, do you block them? So when it comes
Mhm.
to certain conversations and, certainly on social media, there are times where I think that's totally appropriate. If somebody is clearly not interested in having a genuine discussion and they're just name calling and they're just getting nasty and there's no productivity that's coming of this discourse, then yeah, absolutely. I think it's totally, worthwhile to say, okay, this is not somebody I want to continue to converse with. And you should pick and choose because, I think we only have so much time and energy in our lives that,
Right.
if something's not going anywhere and you've given it a fair shot, then yeah, say, okay, maybe I want to direct my energy elsewhere. I think that that's totally valid.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's an excellent point. And, you know, that is probably one of the biggest things that I think is frustrating about social media is when people can't agree to disagree and then you have to block someone. Because I know I've had to do that, a lot, especially over the last year. And simply people that I don't know. It's just, it almost seems like a childish act in a way. It's like, really, I mean, we're all adults, or hopefully anyway. Who knows who's on the other side of the handle, and that's another
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
social
right.
media. The flip side of the coin is like, who's on the other side, of the handle. But for the most part, it's like, okay, we're all adults. Okay. We all have our own outlook and perspective on things. Just think about it this way is if we were to strive for more unity and peace, I mean, just think of how much better the world would be all around. I mean, humanity will be far more advanced, I think, in every way. Technology would be advanced in many ways. I think that the way governments and the way countries are being ran are going to be significantly different. Not to mention is like, I mean, I think that would actually contribute to maybe limiting or, bringing down the level of crime. I wouldn't say completely, omitting it, but when you think about it, is when you look at crime, right? When you look at wars, for instance, most countries go into wars because of difference of opinion. Literally, it's difference of opinions because we know a lot of countries, like in the Middle East, go to war because of religious reasons. That's happened for I feel like a couple thousand years at least now. Countries in the Middle East have been at war because of difference of opinion on a religious outlook. Then there's countries who disagree on economic reasons. Also, it's like can we
And a
not be
lot of,
solution
I would
oriented?
just say that I think a lot of actually religious wars do have a lot of economic and power struggles. It's not just a difference of ideology or religious beliefs. There's a lot of power struggles going on in those wars as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely there is. And but I'm just thinking of it from and maybe that's me being trying to be perfectionist. I don't know. Is looking at the world and saying, well, how about if we were more positive? How about if we were more optimistic?
Hmm.
How about if we embrace more of the let the bygones be bygones, mentality and don't hold grudges against people? Because I'm going to be honest, is this I'm probably one of the most imperfect human beings on the planet, because a lot of these things that I just mentioned is that I used to hold grudges. I used to dislike people who had a different opinion when I was younger. And then I realized it's like, okay, first of all, you live and learn. And that's
Uh-huh.
part why I'm talking about some of these things, is because I don't think you truly fathom the importance of some of these things until you actually experience them
Hmm.
yourself and
Sure.
see like what difference of opinion means. Because I've had people block me on social media, and it's like, why did they block me? I'd feel guilty about it. It'd be like, I don't feel guilty about it. They blocked you is because you don't have any common interest,
Hmm.
and you just spend zero time and zero energy. Don't worry about the haters. Don't worry about the naysayers. And so, what's your take on that? I mean, how do you take that in? Like you said, you either block them or you try to rectify the
Hmm.
situation, which there's only a few people who try to rectify a situation, because most people are just not that optimistic. Because, and in part, I think with males too, is we allow our ego to get the
Sure.
best of us. It's
Yeah.
like boom, ego. It's like, no, I'm right, you're wrong. Screw you, block. See you later.
Right.
It's like, as opposed to, why don't you question it?
Hmm.
Why is this person telling me that I'm wrong in
Right.
my opinion or perspective on things? Maybe they can give you something to think about, and then you draw your own conclusion. But I feel like too many people just don't take the time. So, what's your take on that?
I think it's about priorities. So like I said, I personally, I enjoy hearing other people's perspectives. So I will give quite a bit of time and attention to exploring that journey and seeing where they're coming from and seeing if they're open to having a genuine intellectual discourse. And if that's the case, that can be really fruitful for both of us and really interesting. We may not come to the same conclusion. We may still find that we very much disagree, and that's totally okay. But both of us may learn in the process. So I like to give that opportunity. I like to explore that and see if that's possible. If I'm finding that, after a lot of discussion, that I'm still just getting somebody who has no interest in listening, no interest in seeing any possibility that they may be wrong, or maybe that if they feel very strongly in their convictions, I respect that, but that they want to actually have the conversation. If they
Yeah,
don't, they just want to name call and be mean, then I think there's no purpose in continuing that. And I think it's
yeah.
also really important to assess who this person is. So, I've had conversations with people who I don't really know very well. I've, interacted once or twice. Maybe I,
Hmm.
met them a few years ago, and then they hop on my wall and get into this, screaming match with me and start calling me names and attacking my character. That's not somebody I need to continue to have in my life. Now, if it's somebody else who I'm very close to and I have a history with, and we have a strong difference of opinion, that's somebody I will reach out to, most likely privately, and say, hey, I value you in my life. I recognize we've never agreed on
Right.
certain things, and that's okay. That doesn't take away from I know you, who you are at the core as a person. I still love and respect you. And we don't agree on certain things. Value you in my life. And that I think is something really important for people to acknowledge and to assess, because you don't feel that way about everybody. There are people you
Right.
don't disagree. There are people you disagree with who are not important in your life, and that's okay. And there are other people who you do disagree with who may be family. They may be very close friends. They may be people you work with, very closely.
Right. Right.
Um, and those are people you want to, show them you appreciate them and you value them. You just don't agree.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and I know that this conversation can go endless, and we'll have plenty of time. In fact, and so coming up at the top of the hour here is, for those of us that were just tuning in here, jamming with the lovely Courtney Turner, who, if you're just tuning in, is the new co-host of the RAS Project, and I'm so ecstatic about having her on, because we're going to be talking about some awesome shit. So you guys need to be subscribed everywhere. The RAS Project is available in audio on all major platforms, and we're actually streaming everywhere on Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, LinkedIn Live. And I'm pretty stoked about this because I've been thinking about this for a while. But Courtney, I want to thank you. I mean, for Amazing hour, amazing hour. You always bring the fire, and I love that. Always bring the fire,
You.
into this. And without further ado, before we wrap things up, just want to let everybody know that we're coming back on Friday. I'm thinking it's going to be the same time, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And you can follow me on my socials also, and very soon also with Courtney as well, to follow the RAS Project. And we are going to be coming straight at you. So make sure that you're subscribed. Also, make sure you set your timers, reminders, so you can watch. Courtney, anything else you want to add?
No, this was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for inviting me.
Welcome,
I look
ladies and
forward to
gentlemen.
continuing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for today. The RAS Project. Have an amazing, amazing rest of your day. And I will talk to you later. Have a great rest.